Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be an insightful session to training and assessment strategies. Thank you to Usha for inviting me to speak and to Craig for organising the session today. I wanted to start by introducing myself and I thought I'd share some of my background information and a little about the company. My name is Claire Revell and I started my career with TutorPro as a developer 14 years ago now, back in 2003. TutorPro is a software development company and our mission is to provide an industry-leading technology ecosystem, empowering businesses to solve learning and development challenges. We develop innovative software solutions that inspires students, employees, instructors to engage, build skills and share knowledge. Our heritage is actually with the legal sector, and we've been working with law firms for 30 years now. And as our products are evolving, this provides us with opportunities into other sectors. It's a really exciting time for us. I enjoyed being a developer, but in 2010 I decided that I missed interacting with people. I worked with a medium-sized team, but for anyone who's worked with developers will know that we tend to hide in a corner and just type away. So I transitioned into a part-time sales role, and as time went on, I decided that the sales role would be actually the right journey for me to continue on. It was an easy transition because of the product knowledge I'd gained whilst developing. I then became client success manager and I managed the US side of the business. So TutorPro has a presence in the UK, across Europe, a little bit in South Africa, but a lot predominantly in the States. And in 2017, I was honoured to be asked to take on the role of CEO, and that brings us up to today. Something that's very important to me is that TutorPro is a women-led and also a significantly women-owned tech company. Alongside me, 4 of my management team are also women. I'm an advocate to all women in STEM careers, so any ladies listening today, I congratulate and genuinely honour what you're doing. So today I've been invited to talk about training and assessment strategies, and I'm going to share some of my experiences and the best practices that I have learned over the years. So let's get started. The digital skills gap, which basically means employees not knowing the right technology tool to use for the job or how to properly use technology tools at their disposal. And this is extremely costly. Technology skills have become basic business skills as technology has become fully integrated in every corner of our work. But what we're lacking is sufficient digital skills to be as productive as we need to be. According to various publications, the UK is facing a major talent shortage. If G20 countries fail to adapt to meet the needs of this new technology era, we could be in line to miss out on as much as 1.5 trillion in GDP growth over the next 10 years. A growing skills shortage means that much of the potential of digitalisation could go unrealised, with the UK facing foregoing more than 140 billion to that end. In today's economy, a company's technical knowledge and technical capability is one of its most important and actually often undervalued resources. As more and more tasks require basic technical knowledge, the time has come for us to think about new ways of understanding and closing the skills gap. You can do that with assessments, but thinking very differently about how and why we use assessments. Today's employee is overwhelmed, distracted, impatient, disengaged. Published research suggests that our work is interrupted every 5 minutes. And the irony is that the interruptions are coming from our work applications and collaboration tools. Within our working day, we're bombarded with information. We're all connected 24/7. I'm sure I know I'm guilty of it. I'm sure some of you may be as well. We don't turn off in the evenings. We don't turn off at weekends. I take my devices away on holiday with me. A typical learner only has 1% of their week to devote to traditional training and development. So when you think about how long it takes to build expertise, that stat of 1% is pretty scary. Another significant change is that workers have become impatient, and when they need to learn something, if they can't find it from you and it isn't in a format that engages them, they're going to look for resources outside of the traditional sources that you're providing. The most common use of assessments is to measure a learner's mastery of material, where a person has to prove having specific knowledge, experience, and skills to perform a specific job after a learning event. The proof comes in the form of a certificate earned by a passing or by passing an exam, and that's accredited by an organisation or an association that's designed and upholds those prescribed standards. But assessment before and during learning can actually be a really powerful diagnostic tool in helping busy workers understand where to focus their professional development. It works well because it places the learner in control, prescribes the right path of learning, and it helps the learner to reach their own personal goals. For some of you on the call, you may have read about advances in neuroscience, brain science, cognitive learning theory, and how that relates to learning and development. Advances in brain imaging and scanning have made it possible to monitor brain activity in real time. And what science is learning is adding to that picture of what we already know about adult learning. So before I move on and talk about adults' learning characteristics, let's talk a little bit more about how we learn. We process information in 3 stages. Sensory input is a gatekeeper. If the information doesn't appeal to our senses, then we quickly forget it. For those of you that are trainers on today's call, you are primarily concerned with seeing, hearing, and touching. It's that short attention span of sensory memory that requires you to create learning that's engaging and in context with what the learners are doing. And it's critical to get the learner's attention quickly. This is why when you provide training, you may be using stories, metaphors, and realistic workflows in the content that you develop as well. If the information makes it past the sensory gatekeeper, then it moves into our short-term memory or our working memory, where it combines the new information with existing information that's already stored there. What's important to know about the working memory is that it can only hold on to a limited amount of information. And this is why we're hearing more and more about breaking down information. Some experts suggest that as adults we're limited to 2 to 4 chunks of information that we can manage at any given time. The last stage is the long-term memory. So learning comes down to encoding knowledge and skill into that long-term memory. Practice and assessment strengthens memories, making them easier to retrieve. And when we're on the job and we're doing day-to-day tasks, we're going to be retrieving that stored knowledge and those skills. So there's 4 levels of learning to consider when you're looking at new training tools and techniques. Familiar, you knew it, but you can't remember it now. Recognized, which means you could pick it out, you could pick out the right answer if you saw it in a multiple choice question, for example. Recalled takes a little effort to pull it from the brain, but you can recall it without help. And automatic, it's immediate and effortless. So think about how you type so effortlessly today. Learning is an ongoing process as our technology changes daily, and you're going to need to be flexible, as will the learner. Assessment can be used as a confirmation and affirmation tool. This is particularly relevant to the needs of the millennial employee, which is in fact a larger proportion of the global workforce today. About 6 years ago, assessment became a hot topic. And when you're considering assessment, you need to be aware of the other A word. Yes, anxiety. Over the years, Team Tutor Pro have found 2 common types of user who fear the word assessment. The first has the fear of the unknown and feels things like, I'm a good employee, so why should I take a test? If I fail, am I going to get fired? I've worked for many years at this firm, and it comes down to this one test. I wasn't trained to do this. The second type of user who has the fear is a fear of failure. So, things like, I will look stupid if I don't pass. I don't need to take a test. I don't have time for this. I don't need training. So, do you banish the fear of taking the approach of telling your users, well, tough, this is what's happening, this is what the business is putting in place, so get on with it? Probably not the best approach. So, instead, you need to find ways to support that fear. So how do you go about doing that, especially with various learning abilities, different age groups, and different ways that people like to take training? Some like to go to class, some like different types of content. So there's a lot to think about. And it's about promoting a learning culture. But firstly, let's eliminate some of the myths. Younger employees want video training only. Younger employees don't require training. They're trained, or sorry, they were trained at their last firm. Users come to training if they need to. We have training materials, they just need to use them. New hire training is plenty for our users. So those are some of the things that we need to move away from thinking about those types of concepts. So how do we train the way adults want to learn? Well, learning has an emotional base. There are a variety of characteristics that make adult learners who they are as individuals. But generally, we as adults share some common themes. Adults learn for the here and now. We want to learn what we can apply in the present. How can we get our jobs done today? We're goal orientated, so showing how the training will help reach those goals is crucial. In fact, when we can, engage the learner in developing their training goals. And adults come to you with real life experiences. We each have our own unique skills. We have varied backgrounds, motivations, and interests. And adults are most interested in learning about subjects that have immediate relevance to their job or their personal life. Our experience, including our mistakes, provides the basis for how we learn. So use these experiences as a foundation. Relate to those experiences to the ideas and concepts being taught to keep adults engaged. As adults learn, we try to make communications back to memories of things that are familiar to us. Our brains are full of information, so the content needs to be relevant to real work scenarios using the tools that we're using. Adults prefer learning situations that are problem centered rather than being content orientated. So think, how does the training relate to their job? Put the learner in control. Adult learners like to be in control of their learning experiences, and they're most curious and they want to learn new skills. They just don't always make time to learn. Adults need feedback to build skills. A true assessment places the learner in a place where they have to use their knowledge to solve a problem. It's a transfer of knowledge into action because skills build over time. Having to remember what you're responding to in an assessment makes the memory stronger in the brain. The stronger the memory, the easier it's going to be to recall it when you need it. And lastly, it's also important to understand that adults bring past learning experiences with them. Stress and anxiety inhibit learning. When learners are stressed, they go into a hyper-stimulated state called the affective filter, which inhibits information from passing through to the processing part of the brain. But on the other hand, when we're excited and enjoying the learning experience, then we're going to be releasing dopamine into the brain. And dopamine stimulates memory building. So if these are common characteristics of adult learners, how do we leverage them? Well, that depends on the situation. I encourage you to use the best training technique and the tools for the situation and for the content. How you develop and deliver training for security awareness, for example, will be very different to how you develop training on creating a brief. How you approach rollout training is going to be very different to how you approach a training program to develop core competencies. What you're doing is looking for the right blend of methods and tools to support your training objective. Your legal professionals are struggling to use their technology efficiently, and these distractions to your learner's attention are competing with your training efforts. So you'll have to adjust what you're doing to compete with their short attention spans. In order to reduce time to competency, you're going to need to find new ways of delivering training that creates engaging learning experiences and provides learning at the moment of need. Microlearning. It's being used more and more these days, which is fantastic, but it's not the standard. And if you're not using it, it really is something that you should consider. Microlearning, for those of you that don't know, is a method of learning where very specific concepts and ideas are presented in very small chunks over a very short time frame. Think around 2 to 3 minutes. And often these can be at the time of need, at the point, at the moment that they need the user needs them. These small pieces of content must be able to stand alone, but they can be, and from our experience, are often part of a larger learning object. Some of the benefits of using microlearning include increased engagement uh, by providing the learner flexibility to learn what they need and when they need it. The short modules can be used as a reinforcement tool for practice while being integrated into their daily routine as well. They can also be used to increase the effectiveness of your other training efforts as part of a blended program or continuous learning program. So how do you create microlearning if you're not already doing so? You follow the same principles actually of the course design by defining your learning objects, but for microlearning you assign only one objective to the content. You get to the point and you focus on only the essential objective and leave the good to know objectives for another format, perhaps a quick reference guide. Just like your other training efforts, you make a connection for the learner and link what you're teaching to what they already know. Use examples. We mentioned this earlier, stories, documents that are relevant to their work and the role that they play at the firm. Microlearning modules can make learners feel accomplished. The result is a very positive connection between the material that you're producing and the learner themselves. Whether it's in the classroom or e-learning, focused attention is necessary to acquire that new knowledge, and short learning sessions will increase knowledge retention. I love this quote. It's a great one to remember. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. It really is, kind of says it all, doesn't it? So there's two types of assessment. Formative assessment, which happens in the flow of learning, more commonly known as flipped assessment these days, and it's similar to the flipped classroom concept. Flipped assessment happens at regular intervals of a learner's progress. It's embedded within the lesson and in the learning plans in order to identify learning gaps. The importance that we need to remember with flipped assessment is the immediate feedback. It allows you and the learner to measure individual strengths and weaknesses, and it focuses on their unique learning needs. The second type of assessment is summative assessment. And this is the traditional assessment where you're probably very familiar with it. We provide this to the learner at the end of the learning to test what's been recalled from the training event and evaluate learning according to a benchmark that's set by the trainer. Each type of assessment has its own value because learning happens when we are required to recall what we know. However, Flipping the assessment process to embed it in the flow of learning where the learner is in control can be seen as less threatening. Remember, we talked about anxiety before, and this will help you create a positive learning and a positive testing culture. To be honest, whichever assessment type you use, you're helping the adult learner reach their goals, both short-term and long-term. Assessment should adjust to changes in real workflow because, as we all know, technology is constantly changing. And you want to compel your users to respond with their best effort by making it apply to their work that they're actually doing. So again, making it relevant. Assessment should always be more than just a pass or fail because it's a learning experience in itself. So bear that in mind as well. People need to understand where they are now and where they need to be in order to see that gap in their skills and then give them goals to work towards. Remember, we mentioned this again earlier, adult learners like goals. So think about how you can incorporate that as well. So how do you change? It seems like a lot of work. Well, start at the beginning. New hires. In fact, even before, you can start at the pre-hire stage, as a number of our client family are now doing. It's important you find a tool that allows you to truly assess skill levels. Knowledge checks, you may call them exercises, they have a place in learning or in the learning experience. However, they're not true assessments. They allow the user to confirm what they thought they knew, but they're in a simulated environment. It doesn't test them in their environment that they're used to working in day to day. So without a wider solution, it's only going to be half the answer. Also, things to bear in mind if you're familiar with using knowledge checks and exercises. Typically, they don't include your firm's custom styles, templates, macros, various other add-ins. And we know from experience that legal is a particular sector that does have a lot of customizations and add-ins. And knowledge checks put the application in the correct state for the user after they failed the task. So that's not a true representation for the user, thinking about when they're going to be working at their desk. I recommend that your new hire training is structured to include an assessment to identify the user's baseline skill level. This allows the training department to train the relevant topics immediately rather than you having to guess or rely on the user to tell you what they think they know and don't know. Always follow up, provide targeted training and reassess. It sounds so obvious, doesn't it? Reassess, obviously, but so many firms provide an assessment and then they don't follow up with targeted training and then reassess their users. So, you need to reassess to ensure the user's skills have in fact improved. Provide ongoing support and continued learning. We all need to continue to learn in all aspects of life, so this shouldn't just be an initiative as a one-off. It should be there and ongoing, and the support should be there as well. It needs to be relevant, so have a look at your groups or departments. Not everyone should be trained on the same topics. Obviously, everyone has a varied role. If you have new team members, include them on the initiative. Get them up to speed and involve them. Create a plan and collaborate. As part of that plan, ensure that you have a follow-up plan for continued training and that continued support. And check in with each group or department, depending on how you want to do it, on a regular basis. So be sure to do that. So what's the actual process laid out look like? Okay, so firstly, we want to assess the users. We need to find out what they know and what they don't know. Find out where they could be more productive and where they could improve efficiency. It's not productive for the end user or in fact the training department to have to provide users with a full syllabus of training when they may only need to build their skills when working with styles and section breaks, for example. So assess them and truly find out what they know and what they don't know. Target training. Now that the user has completed the assessment, assign them the relevant targeted training. Use a workshop series, perhaps to let them practice. Technology skills need to be practiced. You can't just watch a video to retain the information. Watching a video is a passive form of learning where the learner doesn't retain as much information. Better trained users deal with technology changes better than poorly trained users. So practice is important. It helps us hang on to what we've learned. When you don't have the opportunity to use new skills, as I'm sure you may, think of day to day, when you might cook something at home, the more you do it, the more you remember. And if you don't have the opportunity, or your users don't have the opportunity to use the skills that you're teaching them, then the brain doesn't make the necessary connection to make the new knowledge stick. If you don't think that your users will be able to apply what they learnt in the classroom, offer e-learning content that they can review. Adults learn best and retain most by doing. And the more we practice, the stronger the knowledge embeds in our brain, and the easier it is to recall it when we need to do so on the job. As I mentioned previously, reassess. It's so important to reassess users once they've completed the targeted training. How else can you prove that your users have been upskilled, and whether you've seen a return on investment on your training? This will also help a wider employee engagement, as it takes assessment from being that aggressive benchmark to a way of demonstrating to an employee how much they're improving, how much better that they're doing. And lastly, ongoing support. Provide ongoing training, ongoing support, empower your users to obtain that easy access to short, bite-sized modules. Instead of them having to call the help desk, ask a colleague, spend endless hours time searching the internet for an answer, provide that for them in an easy way that they can access. Our job is to come up with ways to increase that learning retention, and recall and move learning moments into that long-term memory. Our memories decay over time as we start to get older, but the more times we actively recall a memory, then the stronger it becomes. And that's the same through everything that we do throughout life. So when I talk about assessments and saying that they should be a true assessment, they should be something that's not a knowledge check, what am I talking about? What do I mean? Well, firstly, the difference between an assessment and a knowledge check, or an exercise, depending on your preference in terminology. A knowledge check is a simulated piece of content. If the user doesn't know the answer and they get it wrong 3 times, for example, it's going to move forward. So it puts the document, puts the graphic that's been put into the content in the right state for the user to be able to move on. If we look at this particular example of one of our assessments, then these take place in the live application. So when a user launches the assessment, they see an instruction appear on screen, and it sits on top of the application. They may need to open up a specific document from your DMS, they may need to interact with a practice management system, or they may need to open up a sample document as we're showing here. Either way, this is going to be opening up the application on their PC. So the user's reading the instruction on screen, they're performing the task, and the instruction is recognizing what the user has done. They've completed the right steps, and it's automatically proceeding. So it's working with the user as they're performing the task. We provide sample documents so that it's relevant. Again, providing the users with something that they can relate to. Because the user's working on their desktop in their application, they have access to all the firm's customizations, their add-ins, the styles, the templates, and users can complete the task using any method. So if there's shortcuts available, rather than clicking file open, they might want to do the keyboard shortcut, they can do so. So there's no restriction on the type of method that the user wants to be able to perform. If the user does perform a task incorrectly, then the assessment doesn't move on. They can keep trying, but that's the difference. In a knowledge check, it's going to automatically proceed, but in the assessment, they have to know what they're doing. They're really proving whether they can or can't do it. With our tool, you can go across multiple applications. So again, it's providing that true workflow, working in a document, going into the PDF tool, and at the end, which we'll touch on in a minute, they get to see their true results. Okay, so exactly what they've done, and it demonstrates knowledge gaps. So that's there to help you support the users in closing those knowledge gaps, but they could get the opportunity to really prove what they can and can't do without having to use those simulations. This type of assessment has proven, in fact, to reduce user anxiety because the users are at their desk or they're in a training room, but the environment is familiar, so it puts them at ease. Following the assessment comes the targeted training, and to support the importance of providing us as adults with feedback and the targeted training, our assessments offer a click-by-click results viewer. And what that means is the user not only sees a score, a pass or a fail, but they get to see their complete and detailed workflow, a true representation of how the user problem solves and how they've dealt with an issue. So not only does the end user see this, the training team receive a copy too. And the results file displays, as I said, the full journey. So what they did from start to finish, the exact steps taken to complete a task, whether they used a keyboard shortcut or another alternative. And it can also give access to targeted training. It shows where the user can and cannot do something, and it gives immediate links to training modules. It pinpoints the training and it empowers the user to close any knowledge gaps and build their skills. And this is why we call the Tutor Pro assessments a true assessment solution. So once the assessment is complete, the training you provide is key. And I talked earlier about microlearning. It must be engaging. Studies have shown that to truly learn and to change behavior, the learner must be active in the learning process. So following on from the assessments, we provide two concepts of learning. The first is application simulation. All modules are interactive, they're short, they're targeted, and they also include audio to reinforce that learning experience. We simulate an application and ask the users to perform certain actions. We might ask them to confirm those actions in a knowledge check or an exercise immediately following the training. They do fit the microlearning approach that we talked about. Using an application simulation tool is also a great way to introduce new applications to users that they don't have access to yet. Preparing users for an upcoming rollout, for example, and for applications such as time and billing, where users need a way to practice those skills without impacting your live accounting systems or other databases. The second type of content, the concept, sorry, that we offer is live content. And this is a perfect way to provide ongoing training and support to your users. These modules are very different to the simulation that we looked at a second ago. These don't have any graphics. They interact with the user, similar to how you saw the assessment. The instruction sits on top here of the application. So imagine a user's working at their desk and they're working on a client document. They've completely forgotten how to turn on track changes. So they launch this Turn on Track Changes module, and they're shown step by step how to complete the task in the live application. They're not taken away from their desk, they're not taken out of workflow, and they're actually empowered to work smarter. We had a client recently describe these as like having a personal technology coach, guiding and teaching them. So once the user has completed the module, they've completed the learning, they've completed what they needed to do in the document that they're actually working in. So they would have retained that information and then they can go back to doing the task in hand. So referring back to one of my points from earlier, we need to train the way that adults learn, and we're all used to this on-demand world, and e-learning needs to become part of that. So I wanted to share a particular stat with you, and this was shared by one of our clients recently. After they had started their assessment project, the on-demand training and support modules, that live content concept that we saw just a moment ago with the track changes example, in fact led directly to a massive increase in engagement with e-learning, and in their case 264%. So using the right tools for training and for assessment, can have a huge impact on the way that they're received and on the outcomes and moving forward for the business. So to recap from today's session, historically, you may have wanted to know how capable your employees were against a benchmark, and now you still need to know that your employees, of course, are working in an effective and an efficient manner. However, you also need to know more than ever that your employees are engaged and they're satisfied, of course, owing to the higher levels of mobility in the job market. So now you can use assessments and training to give the user a learning experience and affirmation and confirmation, as well as making sure that your employees are achieving the benchmark required. The difference is now you're empowering them to drive their own learning journey rather than having to push them along it. When done correctly, assessment can provide you with insights into your firm that allow you to make more strategic and more effective training decisions that support the rest of the learning process, from assigning learning paths to designing effective instructional moments to what type of content is needed for self-directed learning and performance support. So the last takeaway for today, remember, the process is assess, target training, let your users practice, then reassess, and most importantly, provide that ongoing support. Encourage and empower your users to continue along their learning journey. So thank you for your time today. I hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions or you would like to learn more, please contact Leonie or Craig at Usha, and they would be more than happy to help. Have a great day.